Hey there, everybody. Welcome on into this edition of Warchant TV. You might be expecting the Warchant report, but at Jacksonville State, you much rather would get a breakdown of what's going on with your Seminoles, and we're here to help you out. And by we, I mean Irish O'Fell, managing editor of Warchant.com, founder and administrator of Warchant.com, Gene Williams, and lead writer Corey Clark. Use the promo code Warchant30 for 30 free days of access to Warchant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source. And hit the thumbs up button here on YouTube. Maybe even subscribe to the YouTube channel. Get your alerts, your notifications, however frequently or infrequently you'd like to be notified when we do drop these videos. All right, so the crux of this, the foundation of this was an idea between Gene and Ira just to kind of fill everybody in on what's been going on at Florida State and how we got here and how we got here so quickly. Ira's story is up on warchant.com. We kind of figured we'd dive a little bit more into this. So obviously, Florida State has been struggling now with their third different coach here, has shown the results that are not indicative of what people expect when it comes to Florida State football. So I guess I'll start with you here first, Gene. There's so much blame to go around for Florida State winding up in this position, and you can't pick everybody. I mean, ultimately, what's the one overarching factor, person, or faction you think that has put Florida State in this predicament?
Yeah, this is part of a roundtable that you can read on Warchant. I think we all agree this is a multi-layer problem. That there's several. If you want to point blame, I know we all love to point blame when something goes wrong. There's a lot of layers to this. There's a lot of blame. But look, if I had to put it at one person or one factor, and I'm sorry, Aslan, I hate to hear it, but I got to put it on Jimbo. And let me explain why. Florida State was absolutely on top of the college football world at the time. He had everything going his way. The rivals were pummeled down to not. I mean, Florida and Miami were absolutely nothing. You had won 4 out of 5 against Clemson. You were riding high. You had put 3 straight quarterbacks into the NFL. I mean, you should have been able to take your pick at quarterback. You should be able to just load up on offensive linemen and just be a dominant force for years and years and years. And I don't know why. You know, I'm not going to get into his personal life. There's obviously some issues there. There's a death of Monk Bonasort. You know, there was obviously continued disputes with Stan Wilcox, Andy Miller, everybody in the administration. They were not seeing eye to eye on anything. So a lot played in this, but for whatever reason, Jimbo effectively checked out. He got lazy in recruiting. He replaced the Eddie Grands, the Damian Craigs, I'm not Damian Craig, those guys with, not very good assistants. So he got lazy in that. Discipline disappeared. Classroom was ignored, what was going on with those kids academically. So he had every advantage going his way in those last couple of years. He just let it all slip away. And obviously then that problem got compounded with bad hires and everything that's happened the last few years. But to me, ultimately it started with Jimbo because everything was going his way when he blew it.
Corey, for you, Florida State being where they are right now, I mean, who's the finger get pointed at, or at least bears the most blame, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it can't be. It really can't be another answer other than Jimbo, simply because the reason Willie Taggart was hired was because Jimbo left. And that kept the downhill slide going further and further downhill. Gene's right. Jimbo had it where Dabo has it now. Better, really. I mean, it was an incredible program. It had won close to 30 games in a row. And then for some reason, he couldn't maintain and sustain it like Dabo or Saban, or maybe even Kirby Smart has now at Georgia, Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. Those teams are always good. For some reason, Florida State didn't sustain, started slipping down, and then he bounced. And when he bounced, Florida State was left with, we got to make a hire quick, and they made a bad hire. Now, there's a lot of blame to go for that bad hire that was made after Jimbo left. They could have gotten a much better head coach than the one they got. So Willie deserves a lot of the blame for sure, too. But if you just go back to the crux of the matter, like the genesis of the problem, it started with Jimbo's program going downhill a little bit, and then it started with him leaving. And then they had to make a hire, and they made a bad one. But they don't have to make the Willie Taggart hire. If Jimbo could have been Jimbo, if he could have stayed engaged, and if he wouldn't have left, but he left. So that's where all this really started, was at Jimbo Fisher's hands. Now, we can't blame him in perpetuity, but when you want to know why the dip began, that's why the dip began, and then the guy that took over just started downhill skiing with it.
Ira, you got a shovel. Feel free.
Nope. I'm gonna shock the world. Well, I'm gonna shock you anyway, Aslan. I'm not going with Jimbo. Okay. I mean, I definitely think he started things in the wrong direction, but he also was the guy that built it up in the first place. I'm going to put it on the administration at the end of the day. You know, I think that there were so many red flags towards the end of Jimbo's tenure. He wanted to leave in 2015. He wanted to leave in 2016. He wanted that LSU job when in 2015, and that's something like I had always thought and pretty much believed. And finally, Sports Illustrated did a story where they talked to the people behind the scenes at LSU who confirmed everything that our suspicions, that he did want the job in 2015. They just couldn't pull off the deal where they could fire Les Miles. And then in 2016, he wanted it again after that season, but they couldn't get the money, and there was some split among their power brokers as to whether or not Jimbo really was the guy for the job. So they couldn't make it happen. He would have gone either time, and I think that's why he looked at Texas A&M, because at that point he knew he had let things slip. I think early on it was subconsciously. I don't think he realized how things were slipping as they were. And to Gene's point, you had on that 2013 staff, you had Jeremy Pruitt, Sal Sunseri. Sal Sunseri is somebody we never talk about, but he was the defensive ends coach on that team. He's the only coach I've seen since Jimbo was ever here in the 8, 9 years, 10 years he was here total that I ever saw when he talked, Jimbo listened. And he was on that staff in 2013, 14. And when he left, he replaced him with Brad Lawing, a guy who, after he left Florida State, he went to Georgia State. And then he didn't even coach a game there. Something happened there, and he didn't last. You replaced Jeremy Pruitt. You moved Charles Kelly, defensive coordinator. You brought in Bill Miller to be linebackers coach. When he left, he went to Kansas. I mean, the staff got worse and worse. The recruiting got worse and worse. But why I put it on the administration is because they should have seen that coming. I know they couldn't make – some people say they should have made him happy. They should have figured out a way. I don't agree with that. I think Jimbo needed to leave at that point. But they should have been more prepared for it. They hired Willie Taggart in like 4 or 5 days. And at the time, you're thinking, well, man, they really greased this. They had this nailed. They knew what they were doing. In reality, they didn't do a very good background check. They didn't really vet that hiring, and it became a disaster. So at the end of the day, and some of the other things we discussed in that piece were, there's some other things the administration could have done to just kind of help propel the trajectory of the program when they were on top in terms of fundraising and capitalizing on that success. So I'm actually going with the administration, Aslan.
So if I can jump in here, Ira. So if looking back, Thrasher and Stan Wilcox hired Glenn Sugiyama and his firm, is there any doubt in your mind that Willie Taggart would not have been hired if they did their due diligence?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on who was making the final decision and whether or not they were willing to have an open mind. I mean, I think there's a strong feeling that Stan Wilcox zeroed in on Willie Taggart from the very beginning, and nobody kind of put on the brakes. Some people will tell you, well, that would have been, is it the president's job? Is it the board of trustees' job to interfere in those mechanics? And that could be challenging, especially, look, I mean, nobody really wants to talk about this, but the reality is you had an African-American athletic director who, if he wanted to hire an African-American head coach, and if you had a board of trustees who's predominantly white, then maybe there would have been some sort of, it might have looked bad or whatever. But at the end of the day, if you're the president of the university, if you're the board of trustees, you have to sign off on those types of deals. Ultimately, the buck stops there, I think.
I just don't understand, Ira. Well, all of you really. We all heard rumors that he was going to A&M as soon as A&M lost that game to UCLA to open the season.
Yeah.
When A&M blew that huge lead and lost, everybody knew someone's days were numbered, and everybody knew that Jimbo was the first guy Woodward was going to call. He probably had already called him. So why was the administration so seemingly caught off guard by it? Like, you can't – I just can't fathom that Taggart is the guy they wanted all along. He had 2 nice seasons at South Florida. So why did it seem like they were in such a rush? We all knew there was a good chance that Jimbo was leaving. Why didn't they? And it really would have helped if somebody in the administration had a relationship with Jimbo. And I know he was almost impossible to deal with. He could have been honest and been like, look, man, I think just between you and I think there's a chance this might be it. Please move. If he would have respected the administration, then maybe he gives them a heads up too, or something like that.
Well, we don't know. Well, that wasn't going to happen, but
right.
I mean, and Gene can certainly speak to this, but Monk,
but like if Monk was there,
if Monk passing away,
yeah.
If Monk was there, Monk would have told somebody in the administration, look, he's probably leaving, or there's a good chance he's leaving, right?
Or he would have had the guts to talk to Jimbo about it.
Sure.
And the other thing is, was Stan Wilcox fixed on Willie Taggart? I don't know. He's never going to say that. And I think what happened is you had President John Thrasher at that time was really focused on, getting the university in the top 20 nationally, really focused on a lot of the things that a president of a university should be focused on. But if you don't have an athletic director, I think part of it goes back to, and again, Gene can certainly speak to this, but Florida State hasn't had an athletic director that everybody trusted and gave autonomy to, and felt like they were doing what was totally in the best interest of the university only, not their own or their own vision. Since I don't know, maybe Dave Hart, if you like Dave Hart, but certainly not with Randy Spettman or Stan Wilcox. And I think that's part of the problem as well. It shouldn't maybe fall down to the administration, but if you don't hire great athletic directors, I think it does.
Yeah, I want to say I completely agree. There are so many warning signs. It's hard to believe that the administration acted like it was bamboozled at the last minute. I mean, the LSU stuff you brought up, Ira, the A&M thing. I mean, I wrote, you can go find it on our message board. I wrote in a war room in October of that year that Jimbo Fisher was probably going to Texas A&M. 2 months before it happened, it was out there. But you probably had these situations too. I would talk to administrators, people high up in the boosters. I spoke to players' parents a day before he left, and they were insistent, oh no, he's staying. So that's another reason I blame Jimbo, because he led him down this path. He refused to tell anybody that this was a serious consideration. So then when it did happen, they acted like, oh, they got blindsided and they had to rush into this hire. So Jimbo did a good job of not communicating what was going on. I understand until a deal's finalized legally, you don't want to do that. But man, he really screwed over the university that really made him a lot of money at Texas A&M.
They filibustered me, Jimbo. They went like over 10 minutes. So I can't a lot of time to defend your honor here. I mean, for me, it's just simply, and you guys can obviously speak so much more intelligently about this topic, most topics, than I can. I mean, I was not here, so I watch everything from a distance. But it's just covering other programs, whether I was in Mississippi or Alabama, to see a coach who had done what Jimbo did and to not get the sort of free reign that he wanted was just bizarre to me. And I'm not saying he should have been treated like Nick Saban. I think there was probably a little too much confidence in what Florida State had been doing for so long that they could get anybody and they would be nicer than Jimbo. And they'd be able to get this thing to keep rolling. But the whole time on him like nailing things in here, and I talked about in the segment we did for the website. Corey, didn't Jimbo talk to you in the summer of 2017? You kind of doing a story previewing the Alabama game and talk about just how much of like an absolute monster he was to deal with in spring.
Maybe Islan. It goes in one ear and out the other, buddy.
That does sound vaguely familiar. That he was
really
about
if Saban was a monster to deal with.
No, Jimbo was saying he had turned things up, he cranked things up.
Oh, okay.
And I do think that's familiar. My counter to that, Aslan, because in the piece you'll be able to read more of this conversation online at Warchant, but my counter to that, and it's in the piece, is that I don't think he mailed it in 2015-16. I think he lost his focus. Yeah. I think he had, it's like if any one of
fighting, he had to fight all the. I mean, he comes here they paid him pretty handsomely, but for him to take over what Bobby Bowden had been doing, no one replaces a legend and wins a national title in 3 years. So I think he felt that he had done his part more than his part, and the fact that in 13 and then 14 he's having to fight for all these things he wants, then he is going to kind of lose focus.
Yeah, but my argument is he was impossible to satisfy. After 2013, they spent like $5 million to renovate the Moore Athletic Center, new locker rooms, just everything, new coaches' offices, did all this,
and it didn't even look that good. It's the worst $100 I've ever spent.
What do you call it? The playroom, whatever
player lounge.
I mean, it was a joke.
That was like something from a skating rink.
It was just money. It really was. It was just money to spend. It was just hey, let's spend some money. And when he made the push for the football only facility, which was like, I don't know, 2 years later. And after Clemson built those, and I remember talking to him, sat in his office, and I said, well, I think one concern fans have and boosters have is, hey, we just did this. We just gave you what you wanted. Now you want to do something else. Boosters have written huge checks to have their names on walls and things like that in there. And now you want to just scrap it and go do something else. And he was like, well, we had to do something. We had to put some lipstick on it. Well, man, you weren't writing that check. And so that's the kind of thing that happened time and time again. It wasn't like he had a clear vision. It was detailed and they could, okay, let's go do that. It was always all over the place. I mean, that's the other side of it.
It also seemed like his hires at the end, like you mentioned it, none of those guys went anywhere. He wouldn't even take them with him to A&M, most of them, and some of them are out of coaching completely. And you ask yourself, okay, these guys aren't good enough to coach at UTEP or Arizona. Why were they coaching Florida State for that long? Why were they on the recruiting trail when obviously you didn't think they were good enough to even coach at Texas A&M? Because it wasn't like the one misnomer is that Florida State didn't pay assistants. You know, they were top 10 in the country in assistants. They paid their assistants a ton, and that was one of the things Jimbo asked for after one of the seasons was raises for his assistants, and they spent millions of dollars in those raises. So it's a multifaceted problem. Yes, in hindsight, maybe Florida State should have bent over more. Backwards. Sorry, that was a bad analogy. Bent over backwards more for Jimbo.
A Freudian slip.
Wow.
Well, I mean, I was kind of saying what I meant to say. Bent over backwards for Jimbo more. Because look what happened when they didn't. At the same time, it was already slipping with him anyway. And he is the one that left. He is the one that left.
To follow up on that, I mean, you talk about the coaches. I mean, he's the one who insisted on Charles Kelly. I mean, could we admit that was an unmitigated disaster? You could have gotten a great defensive coordinator somewhere. He pushed to keep him in there. And then we also, from the beginning, we saw the writing on the wall with Rick Tickett. The one good offensive line they had to put a tight end, move him to center. They had to move Cameron Irving from defensive tackle. Even that one, they just kind of got hodgepodge together. This Rick Tickett could never recruit. He would never get rid of them the whole time. So all these decisions with the assistant coaches, and again, that goes to your lack of focus argument, Ira. You're just not going out. You want all this stuff, but you're going to push for Charles Kelly to be your defensive coordinator? Come on.
Well, also the fact you have an athletic director who is like, oh, Bill Miller, good hire. Yeah, let's cut
that. Another one.
When you have guys that don't have networks that know how football programs work and they're not checking people, that's never a good thing either.
It was a joint, as we said at the beginning. It was a joint effort. Yeah. The way we worded the question in the roundtable though was, you can't pick all of the above. You got to pick one, pick something. Yeah. So that's kind of where we ended up.
And obviously, as we all know, the guy that was hired after Jimbo really exacerbated the problem. And he deserves almost equal blame because if they'd have made a good hire in 2018, this program would be on the upswing right now. They did not. They're even deeper in a hole. So he deserves some of the blame too. But again, the reason they were going down in the first place was the guy before.
All right, I got like 45 seconds uninterrupted, so that's a plus. We'll
Aslan, come on, buddy. Just punch the buttons.
I mean, we're here, 2020. It's almost 2021. We're still talking about Jimbo Fisher. It's amazing.
Hey, our window is closing. We got like we got maybe 15 more months of this. Then you're home free. You don't have to ever hear about it.
There's Oklahoma fans that still blame John Blake, and there's probably Ohio State fans that are still blaming John Cooper, and so the world goes around like that in the college football universe. That said, Mike Norvell's had to inherit Jimbo Fisher and whatever he did, and Willie Taggart and whatever he did through 2 games, which is a huge sample size. Corey, I mean, is there anything that you've seen from Mike Norvell that's giving you cause for concern or things that let you remain optimistic that he can turn this thing around?
Yeah, as you said, 2 games is not enough. It's a small sample size. I'm not ecstatic about the defensive coordinator so far. I think I speak for many there. It's Florida State. He had a chance to hire great defensive minds all over the country. It is still Florida State. There is still some cachet there. And he went with a guy he knew that he had worked with for like 1 season at Memphis or 2 seasons at Memphis. And so far, through 2 games, we'll see. That has not looked like a very good hire. The defense does not look any better at all. And look, Adam Fuller, it's not Adam Fuller's blame. You know, he doesn't deserve blame for that roster, but he just gave up 52 points to Miami. So that to me is a bit of a, maybe a red flag. But on the same token, it's 2 games. We'll see. And he's coaching a lot of guys that just maybe aren't very good football players. On the other side, I like what they do when they run scripted plays. It shows that when they know what when they rep plays, they can move the ball down the field. And mainly, I know it's not a big deal to most people, especially when you're 0-2. The special teams have gotten so much better in such a short amount of time, and that is something this guy preaches incessantly. That I think that is a good sign. That's a positive trend. That something he cares deeply about has already been changed to the point where it's respectable. So now let's see if he can do that with other phases of the team. Special teams is obviously the easiest to change out of the 3 phases, but he's done it. They look better. So hopefully that kind of mindset, that kind of focus, the vision he has that starts with special teams, hopefully that carries over to the rest of the program. But that's an encouraging sign. But again, it's through 2 games. He might get 4 punts blocked next week.
Short term, Myra, is there anything he can do, the staff can do, you think, to help mitigate, patch some holes, and get this team win a few games, string something together here, maybe late towards the end of the season?
Yeah, and we all took turns answering all these questions in the printed edition. You can read it at warchant.com, but we're just kind of going around the horn here on some of these topics. But yeah, I mean, I think the most important things to me on each side of the ball, at quarterback, he's got to figure out there's got to be another option at quarterback. I think
Don't
the problem,
say that, Ira. Come on.
the problem at this point isn't just that James Blackman isn't playing well. The problem is I don't think he believes in himself, and certainly I don't think anybody else believes in him. So whether or not they've got to help, if they put somebody else in that they haven't seen what they've seen out of James, I feel like guys will rally around them. So while Tate Rodemaker may not be what you want him to be, Chubba Purdy coming back from injury may not have had enough reps yet, I really think that's something pretty soon. In these next couple of weeks, they really need to give another quarterback a serious look, which is obvious. On defense, I just think they need to get a couple of playmakers on the field. Even if these young guys don't know the whole defense, I was thinking about, why we didn't know more about last year's defense, why we didn't know some of these guys couldn't play better. Even if they didn't believe in the scheme, the reason I thought they didn't play well was because I didn't think they believed in the scheme. I didn't think they got good coaching. They weren't confident in what they were doing. Even if that's the case, Hampton Nasruddin still found a way to make 100 tackles. Like, a playmaker is going to find a way to make plays, even if he doesn't understand the scheme. So there's got to be, if there's anybody in that freshman class or redshirt freshman class, any guys that are maybe don't know all the plays, don't know all the calls, I think you got to get a couple guys in the field just to go make plays, like Hampton Nasruddin did last year. And I'm not saying he didn't know the scheme, but if you're a playmaker, I think you'll find a way to get to the football. The last thing, it's just, I think, leaning on his assistant coaches, and maybe, I'm not going to say reevaluate who's doing what from an assistant coaching standpoint, but you've got a lot of really good guys on that offensive staff. Alex Atkins is a really bright young guy, offensive line coach. David Johnson's been in different programs. Chris Thompson's been in a lot of different programs. I know Mike Norvell, it's his offense, and Kenny Dillingham is his guy, but Kenny Dillingham sees things exactly the way Mike Norvell does. I want to know, I'd like to know that they're really tapping into those other offensive coaches and getting some other ideas just in the short term for ways to get this offense going. Those are 3 things I think that could help in the short term.
Yeah, I thought you were about to pull out the page 3 from the crisis PR management. Be like, oh, move guys to the box, and the guys are in the box, move them to the field. It's like we haven't hit that point.
That's next week. That's for Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's actually a good thing. Maybe some different voices or some auditing from other guys would help things out. All right. With that said, no one really has a lot of patience these days, Gene. So how long is this going to take to get back to respectability, would you say? And I guess how would you define respectability for Florida State?
Yeah, here's where we are. We can't talk about when is Florida State going to be good. Just, man, can they just be respectable? Because right now they're awful. We just want to be decent. Look, I hope this is rock bottom, that they've hit it. I hope we're not going to see an even worse performance this weekend against Jacksonville State. But I think there's a chance by the end of the year to be respectable. So we want to do that and define it and what it might look like. Let's jump ahead to the end of the season. Let's go to November. So October with, North Carolina's pretty good, Notre Dame. I mean, October could be pretty ugly too. But that should give the coaching staff enough time by November to just somewhat right the ship. So let's look at those games there. So you've got NC State and Virginia. Okay. I think Florida State needs to be competitive in those games. It would be nice if you could pull out a win in one of those 2 games, but I think you need to look decent. And of course, there's the juggernaut. There's Clemson. Let's keep that within 3-4 touchdowns. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying that. Don't lose by more than 3 or 4 touchdowns.
I was going to say it's a good thing the camera wasn't on Corey when you said try to be competitive with Virginia and NC State, because I'm pretty sure he was puking off to
I tried to leave the Zoom.
But that's what it is. I mean, that's what we're down to. That's where Florida State is at right now. I think you just got to be competitive, and then you finish that game with the wine and cheese group from Duke. If you could finish that off with a win. Look, if you win one of those 2 games, you're at least don't get blown out of the water by Clemson, and you finish off with Duke. That's somewhat respectable. It gives you a little bit of momentum going into the offseason. It gives the fans some hope, some players hope. recruiting, you can point to that. So I think that's what you need to do. That gets you somewhat of that respectability back. And then next year, let's worry about Florida State being good, because they're not going to be good this year. But I think there's a shot at the end of the year to be respectable.
Part of the question that you'll see over on warchant.com on the written segment that companions with this piece is basically then how much longer till Florida State can compete with Clemson, can compete with Miami, or I guess maybe Florida to a certain degree, and get back to winning national titles. And my response to that was, and you guys can bounce back on this, is just that everybody right now is saying they're all in with Norvell. They'll give him the time. They realize it's a comprehensive rebuild. But if you look like in recent memory, if you don't win your national title within 3 or 4 years of you arriving on campus, it doesn't happen. I mean, Ed Orgeron, you look at, what Les Miles at LSU, Jimbo Fisher, Urban Meyer at the spots he was at. It's just, if you don't get it done quickly, it just doesn't seem to get done. So if Florida State is going to win a national title with Mike Norvell, it probably would have to be within the next 3 or 4 years, I would say. As crazy as that sounds.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. Hey, Nick Saban's been winning titles long since his second year at Alabama. He's shown that it can happen. You can do it over and over again.
But he got the first one though.
And remember,
I think Aslan's point is, if you don't do it in those first few years, things start to get stale. People start questioning.
I mean, look at Kirby. I mean, he's somewhat successful to win a national championship. I think we're talking about what if Florida be good to be competitive with those teams. I don't think they need to win a national title.
Georgia's nationally relevant. Lincoln Riley is nationally relevant. Yeah. Those are great programs. So I don't know that you can say you got to win the national title. You can be in the conversation, be a top 10 team. Yeah, that probably needs to happen within 3 or 4 years. I do agree with that. I don't know if I'm just going to say if you don't win a national title, it's not happening because you haven't done it within 3 years. Just compete for it, and eventually you'll get one. You think, like the Braves in the '90s, Ira. You go to the World Series enough, you're gonna win one.
You're gonna win 1 out of 15.
14. Come on, don't be rude. 1 out of 14. So yeah, I do. I think realistically, to get back to national relevance, look, Jimbo did it in 3 years, essentially. 2 years. 2 years they were good. His third year they were good. His fourth year they were the best. Norvell's taken over a different program. This, as bad as it was, we thought in the lost decade, the program is worse now. So I think you're looking at 2023, 2024 is when you could be, if he's the right guy, if he proves he's the right guy, reshuffles the roster, makes it appealing for 5 stars again, then I think 2023, 2024, you're in the running. You're in the top 5. You can be in the top 5 or 10 and be at the table with Clemson, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State. But it's not happening in a year or two.
All right.
Is that it? I didn't want to end it on such a downer. Actually, guys, it's happening next year.
That's not a downer.
Subscribe to Warchant.
I think any FSU fan would say you're going to be a top 5 team by 2023. I think right now they would all check off on that. Yep, okay. We'll do it.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's realistic, just to echo that, is, getting to where people can live with what they see next year. In 2021, get to a point where, people have some excitement going to games. Maybe you'll pull off an upset. Maybe you'll, take care of some of these average teams. And then by 2022, you want to see a good team. I mean, you really want to see a good football team, maybe not, top 5, but really kind of knocking on that door. If that's not happening, and then you go to 2023 and things still aren't, then at that point, I know everybody says, Mike Norvell's FSU can't afford to fire him. And I'm sure if he's having success, they'll have to extend him at some point. But if, within 4 years, if they're not knocking on that door, if they're not at that level, I think you're going to have people wanting a real change.
I can't wait to see the comments on YouTube with this. We're giving this guy 4 years after he just lost by 42 points to Miami.
This is assuming steady progress and good and positive. The problem with Willie, nobody in a million years thought Willie was going to get fired in 2 years. I never did. I wrote that story where nobody ever does that. That doesn't happen in college football. The problem was what everybody was seeing behind the scenes. That's why that got. But yeah, if Norvell's doing all the right things, it's just a matter of getting players. You got to give him 3 years. I mean, Willie would have got 3 years if he knew what he was doing.
Doesn't what happened with Miami give you some hope, though? Not that Miami's going to be good. I'm not buying into Herb Street that they're going to compete with Clemson, but I think they show you can be relevant and pretty good pretty much overnight. I mean, this is a team that lost 3 games in a row. Embarrassing losses to bad teams at the end of the year and a couple good transfers, and suddenly they're relevant again. I mean, I think that the state of college football with the transfer portal makes it possible to flip it around pretty quickly. So not that Florida State's going to be great, but they could actually be pretty good in a year or two.
Quarterback's a big deal. It's
Yeah,
Corey's
Oh,
like,
you think? We
Corey's
didn't even
"We're
get
done."
into that. That's in the round table. We didn't get into that, but yeah.
Corey's giving the rap sign to Aslan.
All right, well, head over to warchant.com. You can see an entire comprehensive breakdown of what we just talked about, even more thorough discussion with all of us throwing our 2 cents in on all the topics and even more that we weren't able to cover on this video. So do head over to warchant.com, use that promo code warchant30. Hit the thumbs up on the way out if you like to wait until you leave your positive feedback. We would appreciate it. Gentlemen, thank you